One of the great things about these vineyard greetings is that people enjoy them so much that you hate to cut them off, you know. It's like now some places the preacher tells you, just turn around and say, God loves you and so do I, and shut up and sit down. But here it's a real experience, and that's wonderful. I do want to encourage you, if you do that sort of thing, to have a look at the notes that Bill mentioned. They're not just a replication of the handout. And Bill is adding in things and giving his reflections, and it's really, I think, would be very valuable if you are approaching this in a hopefully a relaxed, open sort of way, where you're exploring things and trying to really learn by experience the truth and reality that I'm talking to you about. See, that's real discipleship, is where you devote your mind and your time in a serious, relaxed, but focused way on learning it. Now, let me just say, Bill calls me Dr. Willard, and I'm one of those kinds of doctors that can't do anyone any good. You know? So, but you know, actually Jesus said some things about that. And I'm very content if you just call me Dallas, right? And I don't want to make a thing about it. And I know that Bill is expressing good things with that, and people do generally. And I'm certainly not scolding him, but I'm trying to say to you, you know, we approach this, we're all standing on a level. And Jesus talked about that because it really does make a difference. And what I have to give to you is not some kind of specialist thing that I learned in school. And my credentials mean nothing. Because when we are serving Jesus, the only thing that means anything is what's going to happen now. And I know many of you have been really praying for the meetings. And I really appreciate that because what we're hoping to see come out of this can only be accomplished if we do our best, but the blessing of God falls and touches lives and changes on the inside. See, what I'm hoping to do is to lead you into an easy life of righteousness and joy. See, that's what Jesus came to give. That's the shepherd stuff. So now Johnny Cash has a song that says, "The beast in me is caged in frail and fragile bars. And you know, that's the picture that many people have, that I'm just holding it in. No, let it out. Let it out. Get rid of it. See, because someone like that, they are holding on to an identity that they have conceived in their minds. And they keep feeding that beast. And we don't have to do that. And now, this evening, we're going to make a transition from thoughts to feelings. Because you see, that's what that old beast is, primarily thoughts and feelings. And then next week, we're going to talk about the body. Because the body gets mixed up in these thoughts and feelings, and pretty soon it's out of control. It's running wild in a social context that's dominated by evil, designed to destroy human life. And you look around the world, and you look next door, and you look maybe in your own family, and you see how that works. What we're talking about now is really changing how we think and how we feel. See, I ask you to experiment this week with giving thanks in everything. That's a real challenge, isn't it? Right? See, and the last thing we want to do is to suggest some kind of Pollyannish sort of thing that involves just thought manipulation. Now, many of the other spiritualities around us, some have well-known religious names and some don't, but many of the spiritualities that surround us are trying to come to grips with this reality that is out there. And many of the most well-known ones actually wind up just denying it, saying it's an illusion. And they try to train your thinking so that that's not the way of Christ. The way of Christ is to say it's all real. That's all real. And everything is redeemable. There isn't a single thing that happens to a human being in this world that is not redeemable. All things work together for good. That doesn't mean all things are good. Do you understand that? There's some bad stuff. There's some bad things. I did a bit of it. Right? And you may have done a little yourself. You do look pretty good, I confess. But probably there's something, that we contribute to it. So we acknowledge that. And we acknowledge pain. And we acknowledge death. And we acknowledge disappointment. In the midst of that we say, everything works together for good to those who love God and are called into His purposes. See? And that's the story. So that's what enables us, no matter what is happening, to be able to give thanks. Now that takes some work because our thoughts have often been obsessed with bad stuff. And one of the things that really pulls us in is the bad stuff that happens to us. Then we become fixed on that. And we become angry and unforgiving and superior in our outlook to defend ourselves. All kinds of things. And that's what you see pulling your own soul, the bad stuff. Focus on that. That's why we need the discipline of celebration. I'm not going to be talking too much about disciplines, though I mentioned a few this evening. But the truth of the matter is we have to have times when we make a point of remembering the good things. Right? If upon life's billows you are tempest-tossed, do not be discouraged, thinking, all is lost. Count your many blessings. Name them one by one. And it will surprise you what the Lord has done. And it is true, because we have our head stuck down in all the bad stuff, and if we look at the good stuff, we say, wow, I'm surprised. Okay? Now that's a choice. See, now that's what I've been talking to you about, is making that choice. Where are you going to put your mind? What are you going to be focused on? That's your first freedom. And of course, the first thing we focus on to begin to pull ourselves out is Jesus Christ and the God that reveals Himself in Him. Romans 5:8. God recommends His love to us. It's like Jesus is a letter of recommendation. In that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. And you cannot begin to measure the depth of that. I often, when I hear some terrible person, Jeffrey Dahmer or Noriega or somebody, has been converted, I just sort of say, ooh, Lord, am I going to wind up rooming with him in heaven? And no. Or Ahab or Manasseh in the Bible, how awful they were. And they would repent and God would forgive them. See, that's the goodness of God. That's the center of our focus. That's the center of our focus. The goodness of God as seen in the person of Jesus Christ. We have to be willing to turn our minds to that and live there. But we don't want to stop there now. because many of our thoughts have locked us in to feelings, and there are sensations caused by others and emotions that grasp us, and once they get a hold of us, they begin to control our thoughts. And now that's a major point for tonight, is that if we are not wary, in fact, even if we are wary, if we don't have help, teaching, the grace of God, our feelings will capture our thoughts. And when that happens, then our thoughts turn towards ourselves and bad things, and we become incapable of trusting God. And so then we wind up trying to run our own life, and that's where the works of the flesh that we read last time from Philippians, or from Galatians 5, come in. So we have to now make a transition to feelings. I want to use a scripture this evening and make a lot of use of it. So maybe if you just turn to Philippians 4 and look at this picture. That's a wonderful, wonderful picture. Start out with this. This is written by a guy who is in prison, Paul. Now, prison was often a kind of funny thing in those days because, you know, when we think of a prison today, we think of a huge building and all this electronic stuff and steel bars and all the doors and all that thing. They didn't have that. So their idea of a prison was to just chain you to a soldier. Chain you to a soldier. Now you're going to spend all your time, except maybe sometime sleep they'll chain you to something else. You're going to spend your time chained to a soldier. And, you know, these aren't people like Chevy Chase or someone like this. These are rough guys. Yeah. These are rough guys. Think Terminator or something like that. You like to spend your time chained to him. Actually, it wouldn't be that interesting because a lot of these guys didn't have much to say. You're just chained. And now he's in the royal grounds, and all of the evil stuff that you have learned from history is going on with the emperor and others. And Paul is sitting there, and now what's his attitude? Well, let's look at some words here, because this, I think, will be very instructive, and I would like to start with a passage, with a part of the passage here that you all know, which is, I can do all things through Christ who strengtheneth me. That's verse 13 of Philippians 4. But now, let's put that in context, see, because this is not talking about enjoying challenges that you're overcoming, shall we say, and leading a life of excitement and victory and so forth. So in order to understand the meaning of that, you have to go back a ways, like verse 6 or verse 4. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. Remember who's talking. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything with prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God. And the peace of God, which outruns any understanding you may have, you'll never understand how it works, will set a guard on your heart. I love that terminology. See that? Because what he's talking about here is how God comes into the life and begins to protect and guide the inner life. And that's what we're looking for. But look at verse 8. Finally, brethren, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely or noble whatever is of good repute. If there's any excellence and anything worthy of praise, let your mind dwell on these things. So you see, all of the goodness of God in the world is what Paul is saying. Turn your mind to that. You ever think about beauty? You think about why we have beautiful things in church? You know, it's impossible to look at beauty and not be thankful. Do you know that? Well, check it out. See, God could have made the world very ugly. But beauty is good made present to our senses. And when you look at beauty, you are thankful for good and good things that come through that. Just think of all these excellent things. Now, Paul isn't just advising them to do it. Look at verse 9. The things you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice those things, and the God of peace will be with you. So this is what he did. Now, Paul really had a rough life. And I don't want to start into that tonight, but if you know your scriptures, you know he really had a rough life. And it isn't fun to sit in a place with a soldier cuffed to you. But look at what he says in the following verses now. I rejoiced in the Lord greatly that you have revived your concern for me. See, that's one of the things he was thinking about, was how the Philippians loved him and cared for him and thought about him in jail. Not that I speak from want. Now here we need to blow a trumpet and beat a drum before we read this next phrase. Not that I speak from want. See, he knew the good shepherd. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He said, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about my love for your care for me, not the goods that came from it. I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I am. I know how to get along with humble means. I know how to live in prosperity. In any and every circumstance, I've learned the secret. I have learned. See, that phrase occurs in both verses there. I have learned. It didn't just happen to him. It was something that he had to learn. I have learned the secret of being filled, of going hungry, having abundance, suffering need. Now then, the verse, I can do all things through Christ who strengtheneth me. See? So we start with Christ. We come down to the good things that God has filled our life with. And, you know, being content is a matter of not being dominated by your feelings. See, being content means, well, I'm contained. Feelings, when they come on you, you're not contained. You're splattered all over the wall. Right? The person who is content is the person who is contained. He or she has learned how to take whatever the circumstances are and to so have their thoughts focused on Christ and God and what is good that they are not victimized by their feelings. And that is what Paul means when he says, I can do all things through Christ who strengtheneth me. So those words now are things that we really need to keep before us and think about as we consider this transition from thought to feeling. And this just summarizes the three main positive thoughts. Who God is, who I am, and the good things that God has made and given to me. Those are the three positive thoughts. Who God is, all-powerful Father, King, Shepherd, a Savior who died. And, of course, the death is just the prelude to the resurrection. See, if he hadn't died, he could never have been resurrected, right? And so he had to go through that and let the worst happen, in a manner of speaking from human point of view, let the worst happen, and then know the best. And to see that the kingdom of God as present in our lives through the grace of God overcomes all evil and turns it into good. Well, what about you? Who are you? You have to get that right too. Now, look at that wording. It's on your sheet if you can't see it from back there or whatever. But I want to ask you to just dwell on that a moment. You see, once we understand who God is, the most important thing then for us is to see us as God sees us. What are you in God's view? God has a place for you in His universe. He didn't make you just to be a consumer of goods, but to be a participant. So look at this wording. I am an unceasing spiritual being with an eternal destiny in God's great universe. Can you say that? Let's say it together. I am an unceasing spiritual being with an eternal destiny in God's great universe. Right? So you have a future out before you. And the universe isn't going to go away. It's good. God made it. He'll preserve it, and He'll preserve you in it. So you see, really, one of the things that we need to say is the most important thing that God gets out of your life is the person you become. That's what He's looking at. The person, and in some mysterious way, it's going to turn out to even be greater because we sinned. Now that's very important, see. God's plan did not suddenly cut down because the budget shrunk. You sinned, or we sinned. He will find a way to make your future even greater than it would have been if you hadn't sinned. The mystery of who God is and what His world is about will be clearer because of redemption. Now that's a deep lesson about human life too, because we often think when something happens, there's some things that are so bad that it's the end of the world. No. Wait and see. Wait and see. But you have to give it to God. And I want to say again, the most important thing now, once we get that first thought fixed, is to see ourselves as God sees us in our world. And that's important because when we see that, then nothing that happens can change that. God will still see us the same way, and He will bring us. So these issues, like I've mentioned before, about moral failure, about unhappiness, about not being able to accomplish the good that we aspire to. See, those are things that work out as we go on along. And then the good things God has given me and placed around me. And that's where what Paul is talking about whenever he says, whatsoever things are good and lovely and all of that. See? So this is where our mind should be. Now, if I am unable to believe that God has done well by me, I will not be able to love and trust Him. See, and that's where the big cleanup operation has to go on in our minds, see. All those things down through the years that happened. And they are legion, there are many names for them, but they are the things that would make us think, I have not been served well by God. That the choices, as it were, that God made for me have not been for my good. So now that's a big challenge. I need to stop at that point and say, no, I'm not denying that bad things happen, because it almost sounds like this is just a bunch of Pollyannish dope. It isn't. I mean, you take the whole life and you look at it and you say, by faith, God has done well by me. And then it begins to come in focus. But until you're able to say that on the basis of 1 and 2, then our thoughts will continually be dragged down into feelings that are deadly for us. So let's talk now about feelings and understand what they are. And I hope that this will not be too hard to understand. You need to really think about feelings. You know, our whole life runs on these things. And we even have songs about them, you know. Feelings, whoa, 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 feelings, right? You know that song? It ought to be, oh, feelings. But you see, it's worship. We worship feelings. We worship feelings. And we want to feel, and that's why we do so many things that we do. See, getting a buzz on from alcohol, well, that's a feeling. And people get to where they just want to feel that buzz, or the rush of drugs, or sexual excitement, or even anger. See, and all of this is deeply rooted in our body. We'll talk about that some next week. But the main thing is to realize what feelings are here. They pervade and structure our self and world and poise it for a relevant range of actions. Feelings are absolutely essential to action, and we are active beings. We're made to act. And if you just had to do it with thought, it wouldn't happen. And when we feel good, as we say, you feel good? Wow, yeah. Okay, that life is flowing. Isn't that right? When you feel good, it flows. And of course, that's good. That makes you feel even better, doesn't it? Right? So, I mean, even treating some forms of mental malfunction, if you can just get people to be active, it'll do wonders for them. And see, that's deeply rooted in it. When we feel bad, we experience opposition and resistance. It's a real drag. That's what we say, a real drag. What's a drag? Well, that means you just have to pull it along. And, you know, it's a drag. It's not flowing. And then, if we feel blah, I couldn't think of a better word for that. Then we're stuck. We hardly move, right? And this becomes a vicious cycle, because the more you're stuck, and the worse you feel, and so forth. And it can slip into real paralysis. I mean, this is not superficial stuff. And many people find themselves stuck there. Sometimes it's because terrible things that happen to them, or thoughts that have worked themselves out in ways that have led them to a dead end or so. But see, that's what feelings are. And we've got to have them. We can't get by without them. The role of feeling is to move us, to incline, and to allow us to will. You cannot will without feeling. You cannot will without feeling. Now, sometimes you get in a position, and we talk about this, don't we? Well, it's just willpower. Well, that's one response to being stuck, is willpower, and sometimes it can jumpstart you and get things going, but you can't live by willpower. And that's one of the things that we really have to understand in doing this series, because so many times people think, well, it's just your will. Like, for example, I don't think there is such a thing as a lazy person. When people say lazy, you're just, well, you just don't want to do anything, you know. You don't want to. No, that's not it. The problem is deeper. The problem is that the will has somehow been isolated from thoughts and feelings that allow it to function freely. See? And so that's the role of feelings. See, and that's a part of your image. The image of God in you is your feelings. Right. See, when God created you, He created you an active being to create good. That's what the deal is. Go back and read Genesis 1. Let us make human beings in our image and let them have dominion. That's active. The image of God in you is not your mind, it's your will. And in all of creation, as we know it, the only thing that has a will is a person, a human being. And that's one of the things so sad to see, people who can't tell the difference between a human being and an animal. Right? See, now you know, probably you read the newspapers, and you know that they've now discovered a brand of chimpanzee that has almost all of your DNA. And what conclusion are you supposed to draw? That you're very like a chimp. But here's the conclusion you want to draw. There's a great deal more to you than there is to a chimp. Namely, you're not just DNA. And if you ask the person who found that whether or not he thinks that the chimp has 99.4%, that's the figure they give, of his experiences, I guarantee you he will stop before he says yes. Right? Because experience is what your life consists in. And the life of a chimpanzee is not your life. And at the center of this is your will and your understanding and your capacity to relate to God. See, it's very important to understand that. And your feelings are vital to that. Now, chimps have feelings and chimps have thoughts. If they had as many thoughts as that story suggests, they would be able to do better on tests than some of my students. But see, there's no comparison, because my students, however much like a chimp they may look and act, actually have the capacity to do things like solve equations of second level in algebra. All kinds of things. See, that's important to understand now. So the feelings, there is not something that can be this inclined to feeling. It can't be left to thought. Now, without real thought and right thought, we're in trouble, but you have to have feelings to guide, and generally they do guide in ways that realize good that is beyond thought. If all you could do is think, you would think too much. You'd think too much. And so, for example, when we get married, we usually have a desire that guides us, not just thought. Gee, this is a wonderful person, wouldn't it be wonderful for us to have a life together, and so forth and so on. Well, we need to have that, and today many people don't know what marriage is. But we also need to have this wonderful, sweet, beautiful person. See, that's what I thought when I first saw Jane. And I haven't changed my mind. See? But if it had just been a matter of thought, I wouldn't have had enough sense to do what was good for me. Yeah? I mean, think of having to eat all the time just because you thought it's time to eat. See, God has formed our lives in wonderful ways and put our will right down here in the center of our thoughts and our feelings. And so we have to have right thoughts to guide, because we can't allow our desires to define what is good. That's the situation we're in roughly today, where people define good in terms of what is desired. And that lies back of so many of our problems. So we have to understand the place of thought and the place of emotion. Now, generally, in a fallen world, the feelings that are present are set against God, because they're focused on the self, and the wholeness of life. And the first face of brokenness is in our feelings. All right. So if you read the newspaper in the morning, you'll see that a lot of bad things happened. And most of those happened immediately because of feelings. They didn't happen because of thoughts. Now, if the thoughts had been right, perhaps many of them wouldn't have happened. So you need both of them, and they need both to be right. And in this world, the terrible pain and suffering that people live through at the level of feelings is the first face of brokenness. And that's where we begin to take it out on others, always those nearest to us. And so in families, you have a family organized around the pain of one or more members and acting out of that pain. Although feelings are basically good, in the form that they have assumed, they do tremendous harm. And in some respect, art helps us with this. And what makes art interesting is the brokenness of human life. See, art always requires a contrast between good and evil. And so in our movies and in our plays and our music, right? I mean, what does Shelley say about this? We look before and after, we pine for what is not, and our sincerest laughter with some pain is fraught. Our sweetest songs are those that tell of saddest thought. Isn't that interesting? See, that's human life. That's broken human life. And art is one way of helping us understand that. And Aristotle's theory that it was cathartic, that it helped us cleanse and purge the deadly emotions. And here's Anna Marie, and she directs plays and works in the field of art. Others of you may do that. But that play is a reflection of the natural human condition. Now, among intellectual people, they tend to want to substitute art for religion. And especially any kind of straightforward religion in terms of belief about God and about Christ and so on, or in other religions, the details. And so they try to smooth it over and make it something that is merely aesthetic. See, merely aesthetic. But one side of that is what tells you how powerful art is and how deep the need is. And see, we suffer today because the field of art has been corrupted. And it has lost its purpose of healing and revelation of truth. And now it just wants to get attention. And that's why sex and violence is such a big deal. See, when we talk about sex and violence, the real problem is not moral, it's aesthetic. We have people who cannot produce art that is healing. They can't get the contrast right and use evil to reveal good. And art is one of those great functions. Now, in our churches, the artist often has the hardest time because they're in a world of imagination, and that is often experienced as threatening. But you see, what happens if the people of God do not redeem art by their presence, and I don't mean by making Christian pictures or whatever, I mean making good pictures, right? If they don't do it, then it's taken over by evil and used with tremendous force. And the 20th century and the present is full of all these things. The feelings are basically good, but they have become twisted and constantly deepen the human brokenness. And then when all of the aspects of human life, like art and information and all of those aspects, are not able to come back against this and find a way to straighten out and see the good and see the right and have the emotions that will support it, then it just gets deeper and deeper into what is problematic. Now, I mean, just to be sure what we're talking about quickly. I've talked about sensations, feelings, and emotions, and it's really an unruly lot of things. But we know in general pain, hunger, sexual desire, weariness, comfort, gratified desire, I should have desire in there, energetic life, being left out, feeling loved, loving, anger, joy, being interested, that's a feeling, bored, fear, safe, greed, resentment, vengefulness, adoration. These are cases of feelings or emotion. So this is what we're talking about now. And feelings always involve inclinations to good or evil. I really want to spend some time on this screen now and help you think through this, because confusion on this matter defeats a lot of people before they do anything wrong. For example, many people don't understand that the thought of sin is not sin. So if you are angry at someone and you think about doing something bad to them, that isn't a sin. That isn't even temptation. Just the thought. The temptation comes in at the point where we have an inclination to do it. There is a tug, a pull, something that moves us in that direction. And but temptation also is not sin. See, temptation is something that we can let go over into the final stage, which is willingness to sin. Okay, now, the clearest illustration of this in Jesus' teaching is what he said about adultery. And you'll remember that teaching in Matthew 5. Right. And so now it applies to any kind of sin. But that's one of the more powerful ones, and he addresses it. And he is saying that it is not enough just to avoid the action. He's talking about something that everyone knows. There must have been construction workers in Jesus' day. He's talking about looking for the purpose of lusting. He's not talking about having a thought. He's not talking about even being tempted. He's talking about looking for the purpose of lusting. That's the person who would be willing if the circumstances were right. And Jesus says that person has already sinned. But it's very important to understand where that happens. Now, if we want to stay out of that, and that would include staying out of the action, we stay out of temptation. And one way of doing that is to stay out of thought, but that's not an altogether healthy way of doing it. See, people in the early centuries of the church read what Jesus said, and they said, we want to do this, and so we will not see a woman. And so you had people who would brag about not having seen their mother or their sister for 30 years. Now, this is literally true. But now you see the legalism in that? Because what they do is they took Jesus' teachings, well, don't look to lust, and said, well, we know how not to do that. Don't look. How do you not look? Live where you can't see. And this is a part of the really sad story of the Christian church that sees women as evil, or less at least, than men. Now you see, Jesus is not talking about doing that. See, he's talking about a kind of change, an inward change, where you wouldn't do what he's saying don't do. And if you understand that, then you will have a route of dealing with these kinds of issues, because then you will know how to stay out of inclination without cutting off thought. See? You can learn how to do that. toward goodness the same way, except here we want to move towards. Just the thought of goodness is not enough. Just being inclined to goodness, not enough. We want to be in a situation where we're ready to do it when the situation is right. And we're poised to do the good. And this kind of feeling for the good replaces the feeling for evil. See, now, we want to grow to the point to where when something presents itself perhaps around us in the social situation, and people are doing things that are wrong, that we would see that as simply crazy. Right? We want to be in a position where instead of, in many of social situations, people expect you to lie or to deceive. It's just something they're prepared. They believe that human beings are like that. So they think they can count on you to do that. And you want to be in a position of looking at them and saying, why would anyone want to do that? You understand? Or in the case of sexual temptation, why would anyone want to be involved in that? Now, if you get the bent of that question, you see what a tremendous difference now has been made. See, so someone slaps you on the one cheek, and you turn the other. You remain vulnerable. People now say, why would you want to do that? Right? Let's see, when the change is developed of thought and feeling, it's the other way around. Why would I want to hit him just because he hit me? Should I say that again? See, because we're really talking about changing thoughts and feelings here. Why would I want to hit him just because he hit me? See, when Paul teaches about don't take vengeance, leave vengeance to God and all of that, he's talking about a total shifting of thought and feeling. Now, we'll talk about this next week, but you see, ordinarily, when someone hits me, I've already hit them back before I think about it. If I'm the standard human being. Maybe it's just verbal. They slap me verbally, I slap them back. Before I think. Okay, so we have to talk next time about the body and the social circumstances and how that works. But tonight we have to talk about the feelings. Because you see, if my thoughts and feelings are in such a way that when someone strikes me or criticizes me or does anything I don't like, then I am hurt. I'm not thinking rightly about things. My thinking and my feeling are messed up. And I have to retrain myself so that all of those things which would normally lead me to act wrongly, I now recognize as occasions to do what is right. And that phrase, recognizing the occasion, is a major part of what has to happen in thought and feeling before you can begin to think about doing what Jesus said. The normal person reads what Jesus says and think, oh, I got to do that. And the answer is, no, you can't do that. And if you try, you'll just mess yourself up. And a lot of other people too. You wind up faking it, you create a legalism of some sort, and there you are. So you say, no, you don't want to do that. You want to become the kind of person who